Alright, so following the previous video, we're gonna go into the Demacian Civil War. Let's go. I do find like the lore of Demacia itself is probably my second favorite. It's the most relevant one, but like I would say so far, the one I found the most interesting as far as like zone lore would be Shurima and like the resurrection of Azir. And the Demacian Civil War is probably like about as interesting to me as that. And like it's pretty high up there because like I love when like shit like this happens, like there's betrayal or like a civil war or stuff like that. Noxus is kind of boring in that regard because even though like it's still Noxus, at the end of the day it's still Noxus, whereas this is like going to have implications to what this place becomes. Same with like Azir, right? It's like what will Azir's new empire become after his betrayal. So I find that to be interesting, like that speculative aspect of it. Whereas Noxus is like almost no matter what happens, Noxus is driven by power and power alone, and it's like, yeah, that's not gonna change. Like otherwise, it's not Noxus anymore. I still haven't seen that cat anywhere, like in all of his videos. I'm just saying, where's the cat?
Promised us evolving story before,
yeah.
But they have never been as close to fulfilling that promise as they are now. The release of Silas brought us a story that majorly changed how Demacia works, and every story that got released after that went even further. Right now, we are sitting on 6 stories about Demacia, 4 of which progress the story forward. These 4 are Silas's bio, his short story, and the 2 stories you are going to hear right now. So for you to get the full experience out of this video, it is almost required to read or watch the Silas story first. In case you want to watch it, it is these 2 videos. In his story, you learn more about Patricide, who are the Mage Seekers, and what exactly does Demacia do to mages.
For the most part, I mean, there's no real, like, you can watch it for sure, but it's like no real reasons. Like, okay, Demacia hates mages. They have people who are in charge of hunting mages. Like, again, I didn't watch it. It's just basically how I understand. Demacia doesn't like mages because of the ruination or whatever. Because not ruination, because like whatever happened with mages that blew up the continent or some shit. So they don't like mages. They think magic is evil. Cool. They have a force that is meant to make sure that mages are caught and imprisoned. Cool. Most of the high society in Demacia, for some reason, they have a child or whatever, or like they have family members that are mages, so they're hiding them. Silas, I believe, was a mage catcher. However, he's also a mage. So, and then he was captured. So,
things that are crucial to know for this video. Remember that the stories that I'm telling you are just TLDR versions. I still recommend reading them yourselves. They are excellently written and they will tell you more about the side characters. And you might consider doing that because Demacia is getting its own novella later this year. So what you're about to hear now is likely going to be the prequel to that book. But with that, if you still wish to let me tell the story instead, let's get on it. The first story, called The Recruit, begins in the Exiles camp, a place Silas created for those who willingly follow him. One of Silas's spies brought a new recruit here. The newcomer's name was Hep, a small boy from Dragborn, just like Silas. Hep told Silas that he wanted to join their cause, and indeed, Silas saw that the boy was just like them. He saw magic within the boy. Then Silas showed Hep his chains and told him that they are not just a weapon. They also remind him what mages are capable of. And then he told Hep that tonight he would break his own chains too. The scene then cuts to the dusk of the same day. Silas and a dozen of his most trusted mages were waiting in a bush beside a road. Hep was waiting with them. They could hear thundering hoofs and a wagon quickly approaching from a distance. A second before the horses arrived.
And I'm assuming Silas, after being captured, he escaped, but yeah.
Silas signaled his mages.
One thing I forgot to mention.
Since the squad was able to use all sorts of spells, it was an easy job. And soon, Silas had a number of captured hostages lined beside the road with their hands tied. The wagon contained a couple of guards, coachmen, and most importantly, a wounded nobleman. Silas jokingly called him my lord. Silas's outcast already had some experience with Demacians that crossed their path. Even if the Demacians promised they would never bother exiles again, and even if Silas let them go, they always lied and they would soon hunt mages again. In the exiles' eyes, these people served swines, and so they were swines themselves. That's why the mage squad was chanting, "Swines must die," as Silas negotiated with them. In the end, Silas had no other option but to get rid of the hostages. He tapped the shoulder of their newest recruit and borrowed some of the black magic storing within the boy. But moments before Silas called his final judgment upon their enemies, Heb protested. He shouted that they are just people. But Silas ignored the pleas and released the stored magic. A black cloud formed above the nobleman's crew and slowly suffocated them all. Only the nobleman stood now, with silent tears streaming down his cheeks. Heb couldn't understand why Silas did this, but he didn't have time to think about it, because Silas pushed the boy to take the life of the Lord himself. Of course the boy could
Become an accomplice first. You know, that's how you get them. If you're an accomplice, you can't go back anymore.
do it. He couldn't just kill a crying man. Even after Silas explained that this lord would rather see the boy hanged than to show him mercy.
Yep.
In response, the lord called Silas a monster, to which Silas nodded. That
Yep.
is what they called him when they locked him in the dark. Then Silas raised his chains and used the last echo of the dark power stored inside. A small cloud was now suffocating the nobleman. Silas then knelt before the boy and told him that he is not ready to be liberated yet. He told him to return to his chains. After a short moment of doubting himself, the boy picked up one of the coachman's daggers
Yep.
and raised it above the still suffocating man with the words, "I am ready."
Rite of passage, big boys. That's all it is about. Rite of passage. Now you're a man. Now you're part of the gang. And now there's no going back anymore. There's no salvation.
That's when Silas's sorrow turned into joy. No matter how many he liberated, it always made him smile. That was the short story The Recruit that showed us how Silas trains his followers. The interesting part here is that Silas is as merciless towards Damascians as Damascians are towards the exiles. So right now, Demacia as a region knows no middle ground. And that's how the greatest conflicts begin. Now, let's have a look at the short story called Turmoil. A story that brings us to the middle of the Demacian conflict. This story happened 1 month after Silas escaped his prison. At the very beginning, the story introduces two new characters to us. Becker and Sith.
See, this is what I mean, like when I was watching the Lux and Garen thing. Look at this. There's a lot of text, right? But what does he say?
At the very beginning, the story introduces two new characters.
He just goes straight into like the main details. No need to go through like every word. No need to explain and like read like. No nitty gritty. Give me the juice. Thank you, Necrit.
Becker and Cythria. Two Demacian soldiers that together with their team were sent to the Grey Gate, protecting the northeast Demacian borders. They were sent here despite the spreading news that people were dying in the capital city, which was very suspicious to the Demacian soldiers. After all, everyone else was hunting Silas and his exiles in the woods. But when Gunthar, their shield sergeant, arrived, all of them got their answers. They were here to escort an envoy from the Arbor Mark all the way to the capital city. The Arbor Mark were Demacian allies for years, and this job was to secure their relationship even more. Gunthar told the soldiers that they are to succeed their mission, even if it goes against their better judgment, suggesting that something might be off. After that, he introduced two mage seekers to the group, Cadstone and Arno. They would accompany them on this mission. A moment later, a horn sounded from the top of the gates, signaling that the Arbor Mark have arrived. At the head of the Arbor Mark army was a dark-skinned man, covered in bearskins and carrying a heavy wooden staff. He smiled at the Demacians as his 20 riders followed him. Their banner depicted crossed axes, heraldry of the Arbor Mark. When the envoy dismounted, Cythria had a chance to get a good look at him. The Demacians knew he was a mage, but Cythria had never seen a mage before, and she certainly didn't picture one like this. Instead of a snaking poisonous trickster, the man had a broad smile on his face, and the body of a warrior or a blacksmith. Later we learned his name was Arjen. The mage seekers asked him if he knows the laws of stone that Demacia obeys. And indeed, Arjen agreed to honor their laws and to not use his magic while on Demacian ground. From this point on, Arjen had to continue without his soldiers. Instead, the two mage seekers now served as his personal guard. They were to stay with Arjen until he left Demacia again. After 3 hours of marching towards Meltridge, a small river town where they would board a ship heading for the capital city, Cythria realized that Arjen was a likable man, but she forced herself to not fall into a false sense of security. Arcane magics were full of trickery after all, or at least, that's what she heard. Nevertheless, while the Demacians were uneasy around this mage, Arjen himself kept telling stories of his homeland. As the escort was getting closer to its destination, it began to snow. At first it was just a couple of snowflakes, but moments later they couldn't see anything around them, as the snow became sharp and heavy, and everything was completely blanketed. Cythria noticed that the Mage Seekers fell a few paces behind Arjen, just out of earshot, which gave her a chance to secretly talk to him. She asked Arjen if he knows about what is happening in the capital city of Demacia. He answered that yes, he does. That's why he came here, and it's the same reason all of Demacia's allies are coming to help them. Later Cythria asked why did the Lord of Arbormark send him, to which Arjen answered that just like a blacksmith can
Yeah, it does make sense.
who better than a mage to help with their problem? When the group finally arrived near Meltridge at dusk, there was
See, but this is so weird. It's like if your country's, it's like imagine, it's gonna be very hard for some people to imagine, and for some people they're gonna be overexcited about this. Imagine, no, I'm not gonna go there. I'm not gonna go there. Okay. Which example should is? Okay, I'm not gonna use an example because anything I'm gonna say is gonna use against me the law of public opinion. Anyway, so you are like Demacia is thinks that mages are evil, but they're allied with people who are okay with mages. Does that make sense though? Right? It's like, imagine you know that Nazi Germany is evil, but you're gonna ally in them because, well, you know, some benefits to it. But it's like they're evil. Like you shouldn't be allied with people who you consider evil, right? In this case, mages. If you think mages are evil, you shouldn't be allying yourself with mages, if that makes sense.
Between Cythria and the Mage Seekers. During this scene, we learned that the Demacians didn't always take all mages into custody. If one's affliction was small, the Mage Seekers would just register them and keep an eye on them in case something goes wrong.
Okay, fair
Ever
enough.
since the Mage incident, that's not the case anymore.
Yeah.
This gave us a sense that there used to be at least some grey area in Demacia. It wasn't always be normal or be imprisoned. Before Silas, there used to be times during which some magic was tolerated.
Oh,
Before
okay.
the escort got
Okay, so they're not hating on mages completely. Okay.
The mood in the town was cheerful. Boatmen were finishing their work, children ran around, hounds happily kept their pace in the snow, and shopkeepers invited people into their stores.
There was this one anime I used to watch. I don't remember what it was, but it was basically, it's like the only mages you would have in the kingdom. This is like an isekai or whatever. So it's like the only mages you would have in the kingdom had to work for the kingdom. If you are like a child and you discover as a mage, that agency of the kingdom will come take you and like you will be a part of them. But it's like, because it's just like it's easier to control that amount of power. You don't want any rogue mages doing whatever the fuck they want, right? Obviously this creates a lot of problems later on, right? But overall, I mean, what's a better solution, you know?
But it all changed when the escort arrived. At first it was a few hooded people with angry looks, nothing too uncommon. But the deeper into the town they got, the more hostile its citizens seemed to be. Soon people were whispering and pointing in their direction, and fishermen spat on the ground as they passed by.
Wow.
Cythria was surprised by this behavior the most. She didn't expect this from fellow Demacians. Suddenly, at Gunthar's order, the group tightened together in a circle, protecting the mage and the mage seekers inside a column of shields. It didn't take long, and stones began to fly from all directions. Most of them were blocked with shields, but one of the stones hit one of the mage seekers in the forehead, drawing blood. Immediately after that, the escort continued forward at twice the speed, but it was pointless. The town folk blocked their path with a wagon, and a second wagon cut off their retreat. The group was now trapped in a narrow street. The leader of the townfolk, a local blacksmith, shouted that if the escort gives the man up, nobody would get hurt. But Gunthar was not ready to surrender this vital mission yet. They had to escort the mage no matter what. Becker, the other soldier introduced at the beginning of the story, was getting impatient. He wanted to draw his sword already, but Gunthar reminded everyone that these people were also Demacians. They were sworn to protect them. Meanwhile, the crowd that now stood on the rooftop surrounding them was getting angrier. Cythria could make out a couple of shouts. She heard, "You'll pay, you swine," and "Get him, get him." Becker murmured that they should just give them the...
This is how propaganda manifests, and this is how hate is born, because you don't consider, in this case, mages to be even human beings. You just consider them as evil.
The mage, as more dangerous objects flew their way, including a horse...
That's how you justify killing another man. It's like, well, don't consider him a man.
C3 managed to block in the last second. Had she not done that, the mage would surely be dead. Thankfully, C3 and Becker managed to kick open the door of a nearby candle shop, and the escort hid inside while they looked for a way out. The room was incredibly dark, however. A perfect setup for one of Arjen's jokes. If only they had a candle. It made C3 laugh, even in this dire situation. It didn't take long and Becker found a back door that led to an empty alley. C3 led the
Really? You're telling me the people couldn't surround the house?
mage and the mage seekers outside, as the rest of the soldiers followed. But suddenly, a woman carrying a heavy crossbow stepped out of a shadow to block their path. Time seemed to slow as the woman leveled the crossbow in the direction of the soldiers. Cythria was the first in line. She raised her hand to warn others of their newfound threat. She saw the woman's eyes were red, as if she was crying, and her expression was pure desperation. Cythria tried to negotiate with the woman. She told her that Arjen is an envoy from an allied nation, and that he is under Demacian protection. But the woman did not care about the mage. She didn't even know he was a mage. Then it all began to make sense. The angry crowd wasn't after Arjen. They were after Catstone, the elder mage seeker. He was the one who took the woman's daughter called Kira.
Plot twist, motherfucker!
The young girl even told the mage seekers about her powers herself. She was a lovely child and didn't want to cause any trouble, and the entire town loved her. But ever since the Silas incident, the laws changed and all mages were brought in for their judgment. Knowing what state the woman was in now, Cythria began negotiating with her. She told her that if she makes a mistake now and the girl returns, there might be no one waiting for her. An argument that struck home.
See, what I don't get about this, it's like, I get that the logic, but this is, Demacia is a monarchy, right? Jarvan the Fourth, I don't know if he's king right now, I think it's still Jarvan the Third, but Jarvan the Fourth, who is the crown prince, is not as hateful towards me. I don't even think he's hateful towards mages as a whole, because I'm pretty sure he knows about Lux. Right? So it's like, you would think that's like, what is the purpose of... Like, I get it, like, the incident with Silas was that traumatic, where it's like, probably the nobles are like, we have to do this. And they put pressure on the king and stuff like that. But at the end of the day, it's like, it's up to the king, really. It's still a monarchy, right? It's like, well, you're gonna have, like, nobles rebel, and it's gonna create different unrest. Like, it's such a weird, like, monarchies are such a weird concept, because, like, you think it's like, it's all what the king wants, but it's like, the nobles pay, like, too big of a role in it as well, so it ends up being like a Congress of the Chosen or some shit.
But in the end, the woman dropped to her knees, emotionally exhausted.
Yeah.
Not before she pressed the trigger and the bolt fired.
Oh.
Luckily, the bolt flew right between the two nervous mage seekers, missing them by inches. But it shot directly at Becker. Cythria saw Arjen make a slight motion with his fingers and a subtle twisting of his hand. The bolt was knocked off course and harmlessly scraped Becker's shoulder. Cythria couldn't believe what she just saw, and Arjen's slight wink at her didn't help at all. While all of this was happening, Gunthar was still at the front of the shop, holding back the crowd. After a short while,
Gunther!
emerged from
What a
behind
name.
the shield, with the woman by her side. The crowd stopped their rampage at the sight of her. The woman then told everyone that this is not what Kira would wish for. She wouldn't want anyone harmed on her account. With those words, and on the blacksmith's order, the crowd dispersed, and after a moment, they all looked like regular citizens again.
Nothing ever happened.
This is where the story cuts off, but this is definitely not when the story ends.
True.
In summary, the Demacian military is now escorting a mage from the Arbormark nation to help them with Silas. And I have to tell you now, Arjen became my favorite side character to date. He's even better than Misfortune's sidekick, Raven. I just love Arjen's kind-hearted personality, even during the darkest situations. That is probably because he didn't see what just happened as a problem. He's supposed to be a ridiculously powerful mage. I think he could have gotten out of there just fine on his own. And I know we'll see him again. Because remember, Riot will release a novella focused on Demacia later this year. So all of this is very likely...
That's actually pretty cool, yeah. I do want to see more of Arjen. Not because like I'm super interested, but because it looks like he's very good at using his magic like without being detected. So I want to see like what kind of like I won't call it mischief, but like wit. How witty he is with how he's going to use his magic to avoid certain situations. But yeah, anyways, yeah, that's the story of the beginning of the Civil War, kinda-ish, like what, how it builds up. Pretty cool, pretty cool. We're gonna go on to the next one, which will be Lux and Jarvan get married. This is like a side story, we'll do that later. All I need to know about Demacia lore. We'll do that, so we get a better understanding of that. And then we have, I'm assuming this will have to do with Silas. Well, Jarvan the Third will die, right? So anyways, yeah. So that's that. I'll see you in the next one.